In a decision that sacrifices human life to appease the sky god, the Supreme Court has ruled 5-4 to shoot down COVID protections of religious gatherings. Now, the lower courts had actually sided with these protections, but the Supreme Court shot it down to appease their sky god. Now, before I get to more comments on this and what actually took place here, just a little reminder of what New York City has been going through. On November 8th, there was a big wedding, $15,000 fine for New York City synagogue with 7,000 person capacity after massive secret wedding. If you did not see this story before, check out this image. This is a ton of people in a giant room. And again, this is not even just about the people in the room. Oftentimes what happens, as we've seen with a number of stories, where people go to a wedding, they get COVID there, but then they end up giving it to somebody who was not at the wedding and that person dies. That's what this risk is. If it was just these people risking their lives and it was their decision, their personal decision, fine. I guess they can make that decision. But it's not just their lives. It's who they come into contact with. That is why there has to be restrictions on these sorts of gatherings. Now, in regards to this ruling, the court's action could push New York to reevaluate those restrictions, but it won't have any immediate impact since the two groups that sued as a result of the restrictions, the Roman Catholic Church and Orthodox Jewish synagogues in Brooklyn and Queens, are no longer subject to them. The group sued to challenge attendance limits at houses of worship in areas designated red and orange zones, where New York had capped attendance at 10 and 25 people respectively. But the groups are now subject to less restrictive rules because they're now in areas designated yellow zones. So this won't even have an immediate impact on these gatherings that are taking place because the restrictions have already been lowered to what is now yellow zones. But first of all, I have to question why. We've seen the numbers continue to get out of control. I'm not sure why there would be less restrictions now, especially right before Thanksgiving or on Thanksgiving. And we're going to see going into the future, the numbers just continue to increase because there are no real protections put in place. But regardless, it won't even have an immediate impact. But this is the kind of thing where it is, in other countries, it's perfectly normal to restrict these gatherings. This is from BC here, CTV News. In-person gatherings among faith groups prohibited for 2 weeks. BC Premier urges caution ahead of holidays. All across Canada, there have been restrictions on religious gatherings, on gatherings in general, but including religious gatherings, because of the nature of how virus spreads. Indoors, groups of people, shoulder to shoulder, there is a really good chance that if somebody in that room has COVID, that you're going to get it. So it just makes sense to restrict these sorts of gatherings. But in the U.S., it becomes a huge issue. Now, let me read a little bit here, a little more about this ruling. So CNN writes here, the majority said that the regulations are, quote, far more restrictive than any COVID-related regulations that have previously come before the court, much tighter than those adopted by many other jurisdictions hard hit by the pandemic, and far more severe than has been shown to be required to prevent the spread of the virus at the religious services in question. Now, this is not true, but that's what the court says. Let me continue reading here. You'll get more information. In court papers, lawyers for Cuomo argue that the restrictions were necessary to help stop the spread of COVID-19 and that houses of worship weren't being treated differently than similar secular businesses. They also said that while the dispute was pending, Cuomo had already lifted any restrictions that applied to the organizations. Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote his own concurrence, joined by no other justice to explain his vote. He said that other businesses, such as bicycle repair shops, did not have similar restrictions. Quote, so at least according to the governor, it may be unsafe to go to church, but it is always fine to pick up another bottle of wine or shop for a new bike, Gorsuch wrote. Now, does this even need explaining? Somebody going to pick up a bottle of wine or going to a bike shop, are they going there in groups of people, gathered for an hour, shoulder to shoulder, worshiping the cyclist god? No. They go for a couple of minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. Buy a bike as an individual, leave. And there are restrictions on how many people can gather in these indoor spaces. Going to church, a religious gathering, a lot different when you have giant groups of people all packed in close together, singing, worshiping, their air cycling, circulating for an hour. That is a lot different. But clearly, logic here does not play into the decision. So Justice Stephen Breyer, joined by Justices Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, said that the regulations were designed to fight the rapidly spreading and in many cases fatal COVID-19 virus, and that they allowed the governor to identify hot spots where the virus had spiked. Breyer noted the grisly statistics concerning the virus that has infected more than 12 million Americans and is currently surging. Quote, the Constitution principally entrusts the safety and the health of the people to the politically accountable officials of the states, Breyer wrote. Now, this, of course, is using logic, understanding that it is the responsibility of people in power to keep the citizens safe. By restricting large gatherings of people indoors during a pandemic, they are working to keep people safe. But no, the court rules 5-4 to appease the sky god by sacrificing life. And of course, this is because of that deciding vote, that stolen Supreme Court seat, Amy Coney Barrett, siding with these religious institutions. Now, using their framing, I do wonder, what if, a pregnant woman gets sick because of COVID? Her husband goes to church, comes home, he has COVID now, gives her COVID, she gets sick, she dies, but more importantly, the fetus dies. Would they care then? Would they rule the same way if this was if it was Muslims that brought this to the court instead of Roman Catholics and Jewish people? Would they rule differently if it were, Muslims fighting to be able to practice their faith? There is just no logic to any of this. And it's very important to always give context here, to understand that in other countries, it's perfectly normal. We are in a pandemic. There are steps that need to be taken so that people remain as safe as possible as we are all waiting for a vaccine. This is just one of many steps taken to improve the safety of everyone.